My mother and I share in this beautiful, unbridled passion for music. And sadly, we also share the realization that passion doesn't always equate to talent. And one of my favorite musical personalities ever, that great American disc jockey, Dick Clark, once said that music was the soundtrack of life. So I want you to think about that idea for a second. And I want you to consider the possibility that your life possesses a soundtrack. What would that music be that serves as the background for your life? One of my favorite pieces, now that it's summer, is that great rock ballad, Born in the USA. We sing about it a lot during 4th of July weekend as we're gathered together, huddled, eating veggie hot dogs. One of the things that I find is that the lyrics are contagious because you can memorize them rather quickly. The chorus goes like this: born in the USA, born in the USA, I was born in the USA. So when I was thinking about this song, imagine my heartache, and I found out that I had misinterpreted and misunderstood the lyrics to the song. Because I thought that that great piece composed by the boss Rick Springsteen was about, being born in the USA. And the reality is that it is a protest anthem to the treatment of veterans in the post-Vietnam era. So maybe that piece is a bit too convoluted. There's another piece that comes to mind written by the great rock group, the Beatles. And we've heard the lyrics to that song innumerable times, Blackbird. The song goes a little like this: blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly. All your life, you've been waiting for this moment to arrive. Again, I thought that this song was about birds, and come to find out that it is also a song that carries a deeper meaning as we are struggling and wrestling with the realities of post-segregation life in America. Now, if there really is this notion that there must be a soundtrack to life, then don't you think that this book must also possess a rhythm and a rhyme? Shouldn't it also have both a meter and a metric structure? And if that is the case, then nowhere is this more evident than in the book of Psalms. I want you to open your Bibles. I want us to read and consider a song and a psalm that you might have not looked at up to this moment. It's the 82nd verse of the book of Psalms. Now, it begins with a superscript. It says, a psalm of Asaph. Now, scholars posit that this particular superscript was intended to refer to a series and a group, a guild in Old Testament Israel, a group of Levites that were charged with putting theological concepts and then setting them to music. Now, I want this to serve as the background for our conversation today. Because in essence, what you're going to find is that this superscript, this idea, is part of Israel's liturgical reality. In other words, everything that is to follow from verses 1 through 8 would have been sung in the temple. So what is it that we are going to sing in the temple today? Well, Psalm begins like this: God presides in the great assembly. He gives judgment among the gods. Now, this particular statement at the opening of our song, the first stanza, is both theologically complicated and beautifully complex. On the one hand, you have the notion that this is maybe presenting a challenge to the brick and mortar of Israelite thought. In other words, strict monotheism. But on the other hand, you have the beautiful possibility that this song is transporting you from the temple to the very height of God's heavenly court. And so you have this idea of God presenting and presiding over judgment among a group of gods. And he starts by asking a question. How long will you defend the unjust and show partiality to the wicked? I want you to think about that statement for a while. And I want you to think about these concepts that we have when we begin to talk about justice. Undoubtedly, you have turned on your television, opened your newspaper, read on the internet, and maybe even engaged in some conversations with people around you. And as you partake in this conversation, you have noticed that we live in a pretty divided society. We're divided on issues of class, race, gender, religious preference, and politics. And those lines that become very clear when you begin to expose your own beliefs ultimately make it very difficult to have meaningful dialogue. Because when you've defined the line that you stand on, it's very easy to begin to see people that don't agree with you as the enemy. This is undoubtedly one of the most divided times in American history. And the sad part of it is that all of us here think, at least to some degree, that the solution to America's problems is voting for the right party or believing in the right religion. Well, the truth of the matter is that as Christians, we are called to something deeper. See, our conceptions of justice don't align with any political persuasion. They don't align with any race, gender, or socioeconomic status. Rather, our ideas of justice come to us because we serve a God who is just. The real solution to Americans' problems is to stop following a donkey or an elephant and begin to follow a bloodstained lamb. And this is the hope that Israel has as they begin to sing this song. How long will you defend the unjust and show partiality to the wicked? And the question then can probably be applied to each one of us here. How often do we see people as mere positions? How often do we dehumanize those who believe differently or act differently? Once you're able to do that, it's easy to dismiss them. Well, God won't have that. God is asking us to take active participation in the most beautiful enterprise of all. And what is that? Well, that is the enterprise of partnering with Him in creating a kingdom. So how do we do that? How do we do that here, in this time, and in this space? Well, glad you asked, because the song continues. And the second stanza moves feverishly as it presents this view, this call, this clarion call for Christians. Defend the cause of the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the rights of the poor and the oppressed. Now, here in Loma Linda, we live in a city that is rather quiet. And maybe that's your reality. But I was struck by how often we can dismiss people and turn to the other side. Just the other day, I got off the freeway and I saw someone. Now, his clothes was rather ragged, and he was holding a sign. We'll work for food. Now, every single bone in my body wanted to dismiss him. I wanted to blame his particular plight on poor decisions, maybe an addiction. But then something struck me. I had passed that exit thousands of times. And I had seen this gentleman standing there innumerable occasions. And I'd never asked him what his name was. So against everything in my body, because after all, I'm an introvert, I rolled down the window and asked him to come. He approached the car, stuck his hand out, and smiled. I said, I don't have any money, but I want to know something. What's your name? He was taken aback at first, and then he shared his name with me. We started a conversation. It was rather brief. And then I told him, there's a restaurant right here. Why don't you and I grab some food? I found out that a lot of the issues that he had were due to undiagnosed mental struggles. And so, rather than dehumanize him and turn the other side, I was called to become an active participant in that person's drama. You see, the song of salvation, the melody of grace that God has asked us to sing with him, requires that we begin to see people as possessing inherent value. Now, that's easy said when the people agree with us, when they belong to our church, to our political party, when they belong to people with whom we align. But God calls us for more than that. God calls us to a life of radical service. That's the song of grace. That is the song of the God we worship. So he continues saying, rescue the weak and the needy and deliver them from the hand of the wicked. Now, our job isn't merely to become involved in the lives of people that may not agree with us, but it is also to connect in meaningful ways and to become advocates. One of Jesus' primary tasks on this earth was that of intercession. And he calls his church, he calls you and I to move beyond the buildings in which we worship and become active. We are the active body of Christ, and as such, we also possess the God-given duty of interceding. So how does this look in real life? Well, the whole Old Testament functions under this idea. It's the idea of covenant, i.e., the relationship that we are to have with God. Now, the writers of the Old Testament knew that there was a very easy way of ensuring that covenant was happening, and you only needed to look at 4 primary groups: the widows, the orphans, the poor, and the resident alien. If those people were being taken care of, then covenant was happening. If those people weren't being taken care of, then the society that God had created had moved beyond looking as people at the very end of existence and instead began to exploit them as means to an end. What are we to do now? Well, if we are to be Christians that respond to this clarion call, if we are to sing the song of grace imbued with justice, then it is our duty to serve as advocates. Advocates for who, you may ask? Well, for those that can't speak for themselves. And why is that? Why does God call us to do this? Well, verse 5 explains it clearer than I could. They know nothing. They understand nothing. They walk about in darkness. The idea is this, friend, that if we don't serve as advocates for this people, then we have reneged to that which Christ has called us. In essence, to be light in the midst of darkness. And the problem with this is that the very foundations of the earth are shaken. You see, one of the things that I find most appealing about the Old Testament is this: that the language in it is prophetic. Prophetic in the sense that it calls us to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. Well, what do I mean by that? I mean this: while there are people who are suffering, while there are people who are forgotten, while there are people who cannot speak to themselves, for themselves, and while we continue denying them voice, we actually are making the whole foundations of the earth shake. It isn't an issue of politics. It's not an issue of economics. It's not an issue of preference. It's an issue that is as clear to Christendom and to Scripture as grace and faith. And God calls and says, I said, you are gods. You are the sons of the Most High God, but you will die like men. You will fall like every other ruler. So look around. Look at all the institutions that we've created. Look at the cathedrals and the temples. Look at everything we've made with our hands. Isn't it tempting to be like Nebuchadnezzar? Look down at everything we've made and said, isn't this the great world that we have created? And in the midst of that, God says, remember, this is all temporal. It'll pass away. But you know what doesn't pass away? You know what stands the test of time? The relationships that we build. So my invitation to you is that in everything you do, sing that song of justice. Be a voice for those who can't speak for themselves. And now I'm sure you might be asking, okay, that sounds good, but what happens if I don't succeed? Injustice, after all, is part and parcel of living on this earth. Well, with that in mind, the song ends with the last stanza. And it's a note of hope. It's a note that calls us to wait for that wonderful, wonderful day when God will set every single relationship straight. Notice what 82:8 says. Rise up, O God, judge the earth, for all the nations are your inheritance. You know what? I often was afraid of judgment. Whenever I heard the idea of God judging us, I quaked and quivered because I thought that judgment was about punishment. Here, this song of grace, this song of justice, this soundtrack to the existence of Israel tells us something different. What? Well, it's this, dear friend. God's judgment isn't about punishment. It's about reestablishing, restructuring, reincorporating these relationships that have been damaged. Damaged by greed, damaged by ego, damaged by anger. And so, today the invitation is for both you and I to be courageous. To be courageous as we join a God who is in the process of calling us to sing a wonderful song, a song that says, Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. I once was lost, but now I am found. If you have ever sung that song, don't you think it's time where you teach it to someone else? Go and sing and live lives that matter. For that is our call. That is our duty. May God bless you.
I'm sure that among us and in our audience, there are many who have experienced the loss of loved ones, who have gone into their rest at times unexpectedly. God's plan at the beginning was to create perfect human beings whose lives would have no end, enjoying each other's company and love. But the enemy and our first parents' choice truncated that original plan and dramatically shortened our lives. And yet, as Solomon reminds us, God has, quote, set eternity in the hearts of men. Song writers and poets have expressed through the centuries this desire deep in our hearts to live forever. What will remain of your life and mine when it comes to an end? Because whether we are ready or not, our existence on this earth will end. Perhaps earlier than we thought. Of course, Jesus may return in glory while we are still alive. What a joyous surprise that would be. But if human history continues its usual course, each one of us will enter into our rest. There will be no more minutes or hours in our watch, nor days or months in our calendars and agendas. Everything you and I have acquired or accumulated will pass to other hands or will be thrown away. Our dreams and achievements, our failures and successes will also be gone in the course of time. It will not matter whether we are intelligent or important, nor will it matter the place in which we were born, who were our ancestors, nor our physical strength or appearance. It will not matter the degrees we have obtained, nor the home or neighborhood where we live. What is it that will remain of what we envisioned and realized? What will be the ultimate balance of our life? What will endure is not what we bought, but what we built in others. Not what we secured for ourselves, but what we shared with others. What will endure are our acts of integrity and compassion. The risks we were willing to take to support truth and justice. What will remain is the time and care we invested in our family and in those whose lives we touched. What will be important is not how many persons we knew in our life's journey, but how many of those individuals will lament our absence. What will persist through time will be our example and our influence. Who will remember us and why? The power to live such lives is not the result of chance or good luck. It is the accumulated result of choices and decisions you and I make each day. Some time ago, I was reading about the life of Benjamin Franklin, one of the founders of this nation. In 1728, when he was just 22 years old, Franklin decided to write his own future epitaph at 22. This is what he wanted to have placed on his future tomb. Listen to his words that I'm going to project on the screen. The body of B. Franklin, printer, like the cover of an old book, its contents torn out and stripped of its lettering and gilding, lies here, food for worms. But the work shall not be wholly lost, for it will, as he believed, appear once more in a new and more perfect edition, corrected and amended by the author, with capital A. Ben Franklin, who lived a full life as inventor, publisher, politician, and diplomat, was not a particularly religious person, but had been raised in a Puritan Christian home where the Bible was read. In this youthful epitaph, Franklin was stating his belief in a future resurrection to be accomplished by God. He was echoing the beliefs of several outstanding Bible characters. In fact, 2 millennia before, the long-suffering Job, who had lost everything and was suffering from a painful, repugnant illness, had expressed the same hope. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes. I and not another. How my heart yearns within me. 20 centuries ago in Rome, the Apostle Paul was preparing himself to be executed for his Christian faith. There, he dictated to his amanuenses the text of what became his last epistle. These are Paul's moving words. The time has come for my departure. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. Note these last words. They include you and me, all who have longed for his appearing. Our Christian hope looks beyond death and the tomb. It is anchored in the trustworthy words of Jesus himself. Talking to two sisters who had just lost their brother Lazarus, the Lord stated this wonderful assurance. I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. Some time ago, I visited in Argentina the cemetery where my father rests. His life had tragically ended when he was just 53 years old. While crossing the sea at night in the midst of winter, the large ship in which he and almost 200 passengers were traveling hit the wreckage of an old sunken ship. While the water was gushing in, a short circuit started a fire that eventually engulfed the entire vessel, and everyone who could jumped into the cold waters. My father, who was fulfilling his mission as an Adventist minister and church leader, perished that night with more than 50 others. My mother chose a simple epitaph for his tomb. And if you visit the cemetery, you will find this. 2 words, Mario Rasi. The years of his life, 1909, 1963. And the words in Spanish, fue fiel. He was faithful. For Benjamin Franklin, the hope was a corrected and totally reconstructed book by the heavenly author. For Job, the hope was a totally remade skin and body by his Creator and Redeemer. For Paul, the hope was a victorious crown of justice at the end of his life's race. For them and for us, the only hope is Jesus, his life, his truth, his immense power, and his everlasting love.